Dos, dos, probando. Uno, dos, 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 dos. Probando. Uno, dos, dos. Uno, dos, dos. Ahora sí. Listo. Va. Probando. Dos.
años participé en la conference, ahí los auriculares fuera. Eh, bueno, primero, muchísimas gracias Museo del Canal, siempre nuestro aliado, eh, por esta, ya les vamos a contar más sobre cómo ha sido esta bonita colaboración, pero bueno, por el espacio y la generosidad de abrir el archivo y de todo lo que ha estado pasando estas semanas aquí. Eh, para los que no saben, nosotros casi Santana somos una fundación sin fines de lucro que conecta a las personas a través del arte contemporáneo. Y una de las cosas, de las muchas cosas que hacemos es un programa de residencias, que es la razón por la que Krystle está aquí. Nosotros 6 veces al año invitamos artistas a vivir y trabajar en nuestro espacio y a la vez hacer, como somos un proyecto muy global local, hay mucha interacción con nuestra comunidad, sean vecinos de Santana o artistas locales o estudiantes de arte. Eh, y entonces hacemos talleres, hacemos conversatorios, tenemos un Open Studio y este sábado es la muestra de resultados de la. Entonces, el sábado de 4 a 7 los invitamos a que vengan a Casa Santana y puedan ver las piezas que Krystle ha estado trabajando durante su residencia. Y bueno, getting started. Um, so, um, okay, so we're going to start talking. I'm going to start asking a lot of questions for Krystle and Anna, and then anyone who has more questions, please feel free to join. So, Krystle, your work is focused around the immigrant labor issue as a whole and representation of immigrant women in particularly, mainly coming from your family experiences. And we would love for you to share where you were from and what. Thank you for that question. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. So I guess the genesis of my work, this body of work that you've seen, started with friction. Friction between a family member and the point where your life shifts and values shift, and you try to try to find what was common ground. And so, in that experience with a family member, which was my mom, I tried to figure out what are the things that I most appreciated of her. What is the experiences that she's taught me, not only for survival, but as a woman, and the work that she does. And after immigrating to the U.S. for over 20 years, it was challenging. And during the time, at some points undocumented, until we were documented, you had to really be resilient and creative and innovative in how you were going to make a life. And during that time, I worked as a nanny. My whole family, my mother, my sister, and I worked as nannies, and much of that time was spent um, figuring out how to do this work while not being exploited, feeling like you had some sense of agency, some control over both your time and the domestic expertise that you've gained in this employment, and still trying to find some level of like respect and identity for yourself. After some time doing my actually working all through undergrad as a nanny, that put me through school along with scholarships. I was able to go to grad school, and this is where the ground started to shift within my family, and the dynamic that we had sharing this same labor. And it took me to this point of really contemplating about the experiences that I've had in the United States around labor, around work, how more so your time is valued based on you are valued within your family unit often what based on what you can contribute to the household, and it's because it's hard. It's hard to live there. It's very expensive, and especially if you're not coming from a lot of means, um, becomes even more so challenging. And so I went off to college, grad school with a bunch of baby clothes because the families that my mom worked with always had excess abundance of clothes. And when the kids grew out of the clothes, when I first came to the US, that's all I wore for the most part, along with things that my mom purchased. But we got a lot of hand-me-downs, and so hand-me-downs has always been a part of my life. And so I took a bag of these hand-me-downs, not knowing what I was going to do with them. And as I started to feel homesick, because it was also the first time being so far away from home, I started to develop this work out of scraps, doing this skill of sewing, which had always been a pastime of mine. Like I had a time in my life where I just loved making doll clothes, just from whatever scraps, because I learned to sew from a woman. Her name was Gigi, um, and she and her husband owned the property where we lived in Jamaica. And so I kind of skip between stories, so bear with me. It's all coming back. And so Gigi taught me to sew. When she taught me to sew, I would use her scraps. And so I grew up using scraps. And I think when I left, now going forward now when I left home and was feeling this sense of homesickness, trying to figure out who I am now going into academia and understanding this new identity that is an artist, but then this working class identity of not having much and still trying to build something, I started to make this body of work to make sense of it all. Um, and that's how it began, and that's why I've been making it. To put it smallly, to its genesis, but then it has developed even more so, which I will submit. Great, thank you. Okay, so you work with textiles. You work with textiles. It's something that is considered that is often considered a craft. And you use it to talk about electricity, to talk about the working class experience. We love craft. So we want to tell us more about the to get really deep into it. I think everyone wants to geek out about the process. So, all right. So, process wise, it is heavily labor intensive what I do, meaning that I'm merging multiple materials. I mean, also to find all the things. Because there was a point where people used to just give me things, and people still just give me things because they know I am the one that's using all the trash or all the what is left of your wares that your clothes that you don't want anymore. Like the shirt, a lovely young lady gifted me this shirt. I'll tell you more about it when I'm off stage. But I've always been since I've been making this work, there's a portion of the work being collection, the collecting of people's things, and that being a part of the foundation of the practice, being a home for people's things, and then making meaning of them. Then the next layer is, again, collecting images. In the case of being here in Panama, I've collected images online, also having the opportunity to come in with Casa Santana and Anna here at the Museum of Canal. I had this moment of using these images to then start the fiber works, being the foundation on the image. So I'm projecting images to create a drawing that becomes the foundation of what I then use to create a pattern. As a dressmaker would make a pattern, I make a pattern for each piece. Only difference is most dressmakers, I don't generally, dressmakers don't cut their patterns, but I cut. The pattern is constantly being destroyed. So every piece is a new pattern. In the pattern making, if anyone has followed my Instagram, you may have seen my very intricate collection of little swatches of fabric that I catalog to know what I have. And in understanding what I have, it helps me to break apart how I am going to create tonal value. So in a skin tone of a child, if the child is white, I'm thinking of pinks and peaches as a painter would, because part of before all of this, I was a painter, believe it or not. And so I work with fabric in the way that a painter would mix colors, and I'm thinking about how do you create form and depth and in imagery that allows for you to create allow for the person to be rounded. And so after this building of the pattern, having these tonal values in the fabrics, I then move on and they're sewn together with whether my two favorite stitches, zigzag stitches, various zigzag stitches, assortment of threads. That's like I can talk about threads all day and my favorite threads. Every sewer has their favorites. And then the printmaking process. So I make fresh blocks for each piece. I'm carving blocks like nobody's business. And they're usually these, it's coming from a drawing background of these very quick strokes that I'm creating to just gesture and allow for one to get the essence of the space or the area in which I'm building. And so in the block printing, it allows for me to get a little bit more structural, create some structure with the fabric, but still very strategically having certain spaces be the area in which to print in order to still allow for looseness like a painting. And so these multiple skill sets that together there's a push and a pull. And then at the end, I'm often looking at it and say, it needs something else. And then I may have a tomato plastic bag or a tomato paste, and then I may have something from the cereal box, and I will sew that in too. It depends on how I feel and what I think is meaningful for the story to be told. In many of the works that I did off my mother, I would use Lara bars. Like my mom always made time for snacking. Lara bars, you know, in the U.S., Lara bars is a thing, and I put that in the work because I knew it was significant to her. Um, yeah, various materials, and often thinking about the how certain stores connect to middle class life. Like I think there's so many connotations in one's usage and how it connects to class, the intersection of race, um, womanhood, just all these spaces in life where materials and what we wear are signifiers of our experiences and the life that we live. And so I'm constantly thinking about, yes, this is a portrait, or maybe this is a landscape scene, but how can I use material to build on this story while um, creating these cues and these layerings within the piece itself. Yeah.
You know, I don't know if you mentioned, how important sustainability is to you, but you told us that 80% of of the materials you use are recycled and layers of the
Okay. Yes, thank you for reminding me of sharing a bit more of that. Well, I think what before I even talk about sustainability being important to me, I'm coming from a life where at a family unit where there was always not enough, or there was just enough for you to make do, and so you're constantly stretching what you have to extend its either its capability or the length of time you need it to last. And so I treat my work with that value in a way. It's like in some ways I am romanticizing the past, and as I'm also looking to the future. So it comes from that humble beginnings of not always necessarily having the art material that I want. And but then I've also found now as an artist, yes, I find it's really inexpensive and really thoughtful for the world to make work that my hand touching it is what creates meaning, and that's intervention is also helping the earth to not be a more trashful place. I just realized that this should be late, but okay. I don't know.
I still don't know how to do this because I work here. But yay, it worked.
can talk about you too if you want me to tell about you. Go to your
YouTube on
that way.
huh? I'm sorry.
It's okay, you can just
It's fine.
Okay, so so if as I was sharing with you a little bit earlier, so some of the clothes in this portrait of myself and my sister is of fabrics that are of my like my mom's clothes. My sister's dishcloths makes the skin, so she she had my sister and I, so much of our time best spent was in the kitchen cooking together. It was a responsibility that from like the age of 10 we shared. And so we learned a lot about cooking by being on our own together in the kitchen and having that as the skill for the household. And so I'm using dishcloths to create the skin areas. All those are different dishcloths that are built together. And then I've also fallen in love with, you know, the mesh that you get the baby bell, um, cheese, and sometimes in the US you get onions and garlic. Those meshes are amazing because to me, I see them as a wash, like how one would use in oil paint, you would kind of use this the gel medium to create a wash. And so that transparency over certain areas, I think it creates a bit of a definition to like give gloss, like how light shimmers on a space. So these are a few strategies that I use that as a painter would, and think of how I can use material to emphasize that part of an image. And then printed areas is where I want to really focus in on a smile. I'm bringing in fabrics that also really just gesture greenery and foliage. Yeah, and oh, and then adinkra symbols. In the workshop that I did over the weekend, I used adinkra symbols in to kind of share with my students how meaningful those are to me. And so I often use adinkra symbols in my body, in my work, because I feel like there's these characteristics. Though I know I'm from Jamaica, you know, I am of African descent. We Jamaicans do know that much of our heritage traces back to West Africa between Nigeria and Ghana. Ghana has this rich history of these symbols that are used in funerals and weddings and various life celebrations, and it intermingles with this experience of um, expressing how one's stature is in society, signaling wealth or signaling a death, and all these various ways. And so I've started to learn from my partner who's Ghanaian um, what the symbols mean, and then eventually got a book about them. And so I intermingle them into various pieces to share characteristics and values of an individual that I'd like to highlight, but in iconography, that it's layered within the work.
So now, let's talk about the different things in the rest. So here's an interesting fact. Uh, so Krystle's great grandfather, Albert Lemonias, came from Jamaica. So this is what I wanted. This is what I found. A lot of things I found interesting, but this is interesting as well because so Alfred Lemonias was Jamaican. Before coming to Panama in the 1920s to work in the canal, he actually served as a British soldier in World War One. Now, I mentioned this because we have a great relationship with the Canal Museum, in part because we did this big show of Samuel Foster, a Canadian photographer, end of 2022, beginning of 2023. And some of the pieces had to do with how Cameroon, Cameroon soldiers had been part of World War II as French citizens, as if they were French soldiers, even though uh, they were not treated as as French citizens, the same as I'm sure Jamaican um, Jamaicans who fought in World War One as our Lemonias were not treated as British citizens at all. So I found that like retelling of that, like continuous retelling of that story interesting. Well, anyway, um, so he came to Panama in the 1920s to work in the canal, and that is a song that you've been exploring what your time. So you took it,
Yeah, so
which has nothing to do with the work that's behind, but still. Project.
all right. So yeah, the story of my great great grandfather, but that I didn't know, but my dad grew up with, um, is the beginning of what interested me in coming to Panama, having this opportunity to um, come to the Panama Canal Museum and just kind of see how many people actually came here to work on this, and it opened up a whole new world. And so I had a year to prepare for this residency in thought and in material, and I did so much reading. I particularly loved reading Oliver Senior's book, dying dying for dying to better themselves. Thank you. And that book was I honestly, it has been my map in a way to know what I wanted to look for within the archive, how I wanted to, because I mean you have so much stuff. And this is still my search to make it manageable for the trip.
You could stay a year and you wouldn't finish.
I know. I mean, I spent 3 hours digging in like one book and all these images online. Anyways, that was the foundation of like this particular research because I wanted to expand my discussion on labor and this like and how colonialism and imperialism is fully intertwined in it. There's this constant convenience of whether parts of the Commonwealth previously or territories are these spaces for exploration and exploitation, and then there's no recognition of the work and who did the work, and the benefits of the work is not often not given to the people in which are have been most of this labor force in doing the work, and so I wanted to not only tell the story of my great great grandfather, but then also all the workers coming from Jamaica, coming from Barbados, coming from all these places across the Caribbean. That's, I mean, I didn't even know this. I'm not told this in Jamaican history, and yeah, it's almost like this. It's a story that is there, but it's told within households who have had someone that came here, and so I want to make your resources in the museum accessible. I want this to be known that it is our stories and our experiences have value, and that I want it to be digestible for individuals to start their own investigation. That this imagery and the items that I create are a moment of pause and the beginning of their own explorations.
Wonderful. And I wanted to know how, like, if you can go to like, you know, because before Krystle mentioned how in her other work she uses African iconography, and in this particular work you've been using something very kind of main.
Sure. So much of my trip here too has just been having conversations with individuals, very much like a gentleman who's here, Mr. Eric Martinez over there. I went to his restaurant. I enjoyed his food, and he was so gracious to show me his studio and learned about how lotto tickets is a part of their culture. And of course, wanted to make sure that that way where you want to bring something into your work, but you want to make sure that it is not contrived and it is meaningful in your addition to it, and then also in respect of someone else's work. I chose to create print blocks of lotto tickets within my work, in addition to fabrics that I have collected from individuals here and of my family in the US. What was the other part of the question again?
I also asked you about how access to
Oh,
the archives.
archives. And so, in regards to the archives and reading Oliver Senior's book, I had this opportunity to see how people lived and think about how I could describe even the subjugation of silver and gold roll, how different people's lives were based on just that, and how there's this connection with the US Jim Crow laws of the time, how that was literally being implicated here on your land, and and I think so much history is told in a vacuum, and I wanted to bring these stories in a way using the material to do so.
That's not told in in our schools. That's not taught likewise. Um, so that's something that we really want to do in our exhibition. Thank you for bringing it out in the work.
Thank you.
I I also wanted to have something of everything.
Okay.
So what we see when we come to the museum is like 10 to 15% of the actual collection. And I wanted to know how the idea came about, like people did, how, what the challenges that come with that.
So yeah, it's we have 1,632 meters of exhibition, which is only around between 10 and 15% of our collection. We have over 32,000 artifacts and documents. Um, Most of them obviously in storage. And I've only been in the museum 4 years as director, and when I got here, we didn't have a digital inventory of the collection, which drove me nuts because it was in the middle of the pandemic. I got here in 2020, and we were supposed to renovate the entire museum's exhibits, and I couldn't access the handwritten documents where the collection was described. And I had to design with my team, who are wonderful, but we're not magicians, an exhibition over Zoom without knowing what the collection was. Eventually, we managed to get access to it, but my first task to the team was we need to digitalize this. We need to have a digital inventory. We have a collection system in place, and we need to make the most of it. And it took a few months for nearly 32,000 items to be manually inputted into the system. You can imagine how fun that was for the team. Shout out to the team that did it. I love you guys. But we managed, and it's something that unfortunately, because we managed to merge the information. We had very basic information: title of the artifact, or date it was received, or the donor. But we don't have the resources still, and the human resources or the monetary resources to spend the time properly digitizing the keywords for it to be used, and which, I mean, you know, because you looked into it. But if you input a word, some items might be tagged with it, but we have so many more that are still, and our collections team continues to work on feeding that archive, feeding that digital collection, so that eventually we can offer it to the people. Because what we want, and our aim with works like the one that you're wonderfully doing with Casa Santana and with others like Krystle, is to be able to use our collection and our archive so that it's not just a repository of history. It's something alive. It's something that can serve researchers, and it has served researchers in history, education, ethnomusicology, and others, because we have all kinds of weird and wonderful things up here. But we want to eventually be able to offer it to more people, even in digital format, so that it can be used to create, to produce, to engage in conversation and discussion and demystify things that we might believe to be true.
That is amazing. It definitely, of course, the fantasy is that the collection becomes like the search for it becomes like Google, and you can,
Exactly, yeah.
But I'm sure that doesn't happen.
It'll take some
overnight.
time.
Yeah. And so, but we're talking about the things that happen related to the collection. You have an amazing residency program, and I would love for you to share more about how that comes into it.
So do you. Yeah, so I've always been, for those of you who don't know me, I'm an art curator, but I'm also an archaeologist. So I've always loved mixing the past and the contemporary. And since 2 jobs ago, I was in charge of a Roman temple from 142 AD, and its preservation and the collection of archaeological artifacts that came with it, but also a contemporary art gallery space above it. And I had to commission artists um, to create something that dialogued with the history of the site. And I never knew until that point in my career that those two could work together. And when I got to the museum, I said, we have a wonderful collection. And there's so much of this history that is not easy to discuss through just a historical exhibit. Because we present data, we may present the artifacts, we may present how people live out, and we have been diversifying the narratives. And thank you for mentioning that, by the way, because when I got here, the exhibition that is live in the Canal Zone mostly pointed at the white American engineers, and it didn't talk about the people that did the work. And when we were doing the research and realized that 97 nationalities actually did the work of the construction of the canal, um, we felt that that needed to be the majority of that exhibition space, not the engineers that led this wonder of the world, which is what we did. But going back to the residency, I thought, what a better way to discuss issues that our country is facing or that the world is facing, that opening up this collection and this exhibition spaces, and for them to be intervened with a contemporary gaze through art. So we've had 2 years of artist residencies. They're called Faro Lighthouse. I don't know if you noticed, we have a wonderful one just outside. And it's a project that nurtures both our team and I think hopefully the artists as well. Like Krystle's presence here nurtured us and some of my team is here because um we work in a historical museum. We work in an environment that is checking references, we're checking data, we're making sure that what we project to the world is as accurate and objective as it can be, although museums cannot be neutral. And having different researchers and artists come here refreshes our way of seeing our own collection. It's like when you see something often, um, you sometimes forget parts of it, or you miss something that someone else with a fresh gaze or with a particular research interest can see. And Alfredo Martiz's work, which is currently on exhibit for those of you who haven't seen it, for instance, question the fact that we might not have sovereignty over our own land because there are still unexploded munitions in Panamanian territory that the U.S. did not clear after they left Panama. Um, and previously to him, Jana Adier's work placed Black women in places where they wouldn't have been allowed in the canal zone. So we know there are holes in our collection. We know there are holes in the research as a whole of Panama's history, and we want to use people's artwork and people's research and people's interests to fill those voids and to recognize the areas that we still need to, not just a museum, but as a society, um, talk about, and the areas that we have to pay a historical debt to. I hope that answered it.
That did answer. Thank you so much. So now, I think we can open the conversation to the public if anyone has any questions. They would. That is, so that, the you see over there is from the Lotto. from the
Lot of
Lotto
tickets.
That's my intervention to the ticket itself. Like I wanted the lotto to be this like as the iconography from Adinkra symbols have various meaning of resilience, adaptability, and so forth. For me, bridging this experience of um, indigenous as well as Panamanians that are born here and live here many generations, and then Caribbeans that have come here and have also lived here many generations. I think Lotto in some ways are this symbol of hope. And so, and learning about Chad. And then, so that's how I am utilizing it as this way of engaging in that.
Explain on Wednesday if you want to buy some. The same. I also wanted to thank you, Carolina, and all the team in Casa Santa Ana for trusting us. And again, we love working with you, you know that. But what you guys do is so important and so enriching for not just the cultural ecosystem of Panama, but also to bring perspectives from different artists like Krystle that can enrich our views so much. So thank you guys for everything you do and for trusting in us to collaborate with.
Thank you. I'm sure this will keep happening all the time. And I also wanted to say that, so in this particular residency, we've been very lucky because Krystle needed an assistant, and we had Gretel, who is just the best. And for us, it's very important to be able to provide, like, to both provide more spaces where the artists that come for residency can connect, but also for learning through the residency. So I think I think Gretel has had a good time, I hope, and also learned a lot, and it's been great. And also another voice that is feeding Krystle with more information about Panama and more resources, and this is, so we are very grateful for that. And so if anyone has any questions.
Do we have another microphone for the questions? So the people that are following us on YouTube Live can also listen. Oh, perfect. We have a microphone. Perfect. You're now on the spot. You can't run. We got you. It's not on, I don't think. Can you check if it's on?
Yep. My name is Marian. It's really interesting how they connect texture and colors in the art, and I'm thinking about it, and I just saw the two women in there, and it's really interesting how you connect the texture and I was the question is how do you choose how do you choose the texture or the print in the fabric? Like, okay, this piece is have to be there, or this piece should be there, or this is perfect for this space. Okay, that's a great question. So, okay, for instance, for this piece, so it's multiple layers where I'm already limited by what I have. So I have a pile of clothes that say I have for a body of work that has been donated, and then that is it. So that is my option. So that creates a limitation for me that I welcome, because more choices is just even more anxiety, right? And so in that limited choices, I start thinking, okay, a pile of blue. I just kind of throw fabrics out on the ground, and I'm like, pile of blues. I know that can be sky and like various, and based on the softness of it, it may be something else. So maybe like a blanket or throw. And then when I'll pile up all my greens, so I know that's gonna be foliage, and I'll just put all the foliage fabrics down. And then I think where I start to get a little bit more intuitive is like, say, her shirt. I had just so much. I had a load of girls' clothes, like a young girls' clothes. And so what was so funny is that I think the children that my mom was caring for at the time, this is their clothes, and the children in the images. And so I think these were whether her or her siblings' clothes, because it was about four of them. And I had a bunch of pinks and I had some purples, and I thought they would really work together in thinking about shadow, highlights, midtones, and then any other variations in between that tonality from light to dark. And so I'm kind of, in some ways, I'm thinking of the image as a whole, but then I'm starting to isolate sections to just think about, okay, in this section, within pinks, how far can I push that color, the color wheel in there? So like a magenta, you see like a baby pink, you see like a florally pink, you see like a light pink, and then yeah, I think it's three materials in that area. And so I have all those tonalities needed to create volume and depth. But then also, if you were to see this in person, it has some like, so like, like one of those children, the girls under like a bloomers, in English we call it bloomers, and then it would be under like a dress for a little girl, and it's usually like a ruffly thing. It's like a ruffle butts. Like there's like a brand called Ruffle Butts. Yeah, in the US. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I actually put the tag in there because I was so tickled by it. And so in this
Oh my gosh.
in this piece, it has like this texture, and it says ruffle bugs. And I just have these little cute moments in there where it's like, the something that's kids' clothes are hilarious. Like, they just have all these like quirky little things that you'd never see in adult clothes. And so I'm always playing with the tags and so forth. And so yeah, I'm like thinking of the variations of, say, in the foliage, I'm using three greens, and that creates the ground. Because it also I think about, what do I need to emphasize, and if the foliage is not an emphasis for me as much, I use less variation in the tonality to kind of push it back. If that is your question.
I wanted to ask, sorry I didn't ask it before, and I'll get back to the public in a second, if there was anything in our collection that surprised you, or in the museum in particular, something that you were surprised by.
I was initially just surprised by just how much images there were. Like, people were taking selfies. They were just like living their best lives.
Life in the
Um,
tropics.
but I would say that a lot of the images, at least the part of the collection that I was able to see, were of where it was clearly white individuals warrioring, watching the working class. You could tell the individuals of working class, they were not having fun. They were not posing for these. They were pushed to do that, take the image. And and then who was having fun was clearly the Zonians, which was interesting. And I mean, I saw bowling. I saw, I mean, all the country clubs, and it was starkly shocking to see the life that was lived in contrast to the experiences of those. As I even saw the barracks where my great great grandfather possibly would have lived, stayed in, and I was like, oh my God, this is the inequality was just, yeah. And I think this is not the end of this body of work. You're gonna see a lot more
I'm so
questioning and
excited.
thinking about this. idea of the domestic space and how it's even in that space you're feeling inequity.
And how that transcends through time through our society today, which continues to have impacts. But yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely.
we have three questions here. Hi.
I suppose this is your mom, right?
It is.
Why?
Inspired by.
Okay, so because the previous one when she's taking care of the baby, the or that one where she's like pushing this thing, yeah, that one. I noticed you always print the nanny and then you do the fabrics for the child. Why is that?
So I was kind of contemplating this visibility, invisibility, where she's coming to this space with all of who she is, her, her boisterousness, her vernaculars, her Jamaican words and everything. And like, as she holds, Black is very potent in an image. So it holds its weight initially when one views the piece. But then as they move over to the image of the baby, she kind of starts to sit back in space. So I think it allows for this distance, but also togetherness, like a fracture in the image, which is what I was thinking about utilizing the printed areas. So she's the areas that are printed are constantly in a like feeling a bit of displacement and trying to have footing within the composition.
And one more. Do you use photos? Are these based on photographs?
Yeah, so these are photos that I've received, over time, and they're often the basis of thinking about like relationships and space. And yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you. And I'm very interested in the fact that you was using the elements of the Panamanian, which is the lottery tickets, which this is why one of my things in Panama, one of the first artists who worked with our nationality and worked with our reality. So I was very interested that you are going to take that over as an inspired situation where you can move forward the action. So for me is to give you a handful and say thank you, because our voice in Panama is going to be here in international levels. And one of the things that I wanted to do when I was here, living here, is that we need to create our own identity, which for me, it was my experience of being on the coast of Panama, Colón, Costa Bajo, Costa Rica, and being around all the coasts in Panama, and being around the fact that we have so much work in here that we can use, and we're not valuing our work. We have to start working in that aspect. So my understanding of work is that I wanted to say, I commend you for using those images to, and being inspired by my inspiration, and therefore your work is more broad, and it's not just about the nannies. It's not that you can tell all the stories that you have at the reference point. And that for us as a Panamanian, we wanted to thank you. I wanted to thank you on all our work, because this represents us in an international level, and coming from the fact that I have two, an aunt, and Gloria was Jamaican. She was married to one of my uncles. So it was easy for me to relate to you, because we have that blood relationship and we have common situation, common experience. So going back to the art, it's very important that we understand that women, I say women, are taking over. And I work with one of the most important photographers in New York, which is Renee Cox, and we have done so much work. So coming from that point of view that you're Jamaican, she's Jamaican, I'm Panamanian, and we're still making the connection. And it's like, okay, it's great that we be able to move forward and create our own experience and doesn't have to listen to the experience that people are giving to us, and that we have to be reference to them. No, we reference to our own experience, to our own living, and to our own thinking. So thank you for using what I'm using and keep using it. That I want you to do that. Don't stop using it.
Thank
So
you so much for that, Eric, because I toyed with the idea for quite some time. I'm like, oh, I want to reference this thing, but do I have the permission to reference this thing? And thinking about what am I creating a bridge? Ah, yes, the bridge of experience. Lotto and racehorse, betting and cockfighting, all these things is a part of my culture too. I mean, for all I know, people came here and did it too, like, and so I
Oh,
think
absolutely.
I after wrestling, I said, this is also a part of me. And I think many artists are, many artists rightfully so are referencing art history. But as you said, Eric, I want to reference our history and the bridging of histories of individuals that we have relationships with far and wide.
But the thing is that we need to inspire each other instead of fight with each other, which is the thing that I got here when I got here. I'm like, I'm multicultural, you know. So if I'm being multicultural, I don't have segregation. I don't have separation. I have unity. So if somebody coming from the outside and look at what we created and make it part of their work, it's inspiring. And we have to say thank you. Thank you for using the experience to move forward, and art, you don't have to have no permission to do your art, baby. You do your art any way you want, in any place you want, with anyone you want. That is the freedom of expressing yourself. We not any longer have to hold back. This is no, for me, it's like, thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, incidentally, I wanted to say I have my own museum, restaurant, and I have my own, my own world, which is my own world, my own invention. Because once I got here, I said we got nothing from reference from the coast, so I started doing my own world. So if anybody wants to come and visit me, and want to come see the collection, and want to see the reference that we have, now you have a reference. You can see the lottery tickets, and you can see all the things about Panama and the countryside. You're welcome. You're
Where are
welcome
you?
to Catalina, to PTY.
Where are you?
Right here on 8th Street, by Tantalo, in the back of Tantalo, with the greenhouse, and we call it the La Casa Verde de Dios.
We'll be there.
So thank you. So you're all invited to come see that particular work that we're doing, and that lottery tickets are taking place at the center stage. Okay. Thank you so much.
Wonderful, thank you. We had another question at the back.
I may be a bit nervous to ask all these questions because I really love your work. I noticed that you do a lot of printmaking, and I know you used to do painting, and now you do textiles. How did you notice that maybe printmaking was going to be like a good technique to use with this work?
Question. Okay, so in my undergraduate studies was a mix of many things because, as an artist, you're constantly trying to figure out, oh, do I go to make money in graphic design or do I follow the other road that I don't know where it leads? And so I was on the graphic design road, and then I had a meltdown, and I think I want to use paper. And then that's when I went. I said, okay, I guess I'm gonna be a teacher. And so in that mix, I also started a teaching certification and started to do printmaking courses. And and I did this experimental painting class where I was challenged to create a painting without paint using alternative material. Shout out to Professor Bastidas at New Jersey City University that's still helping students to find their voices.
And as I made that piece initially out of like shirts that I was actually about to throw away, that were like, you know, you do a 5K run, you were a part, you volunteered at a museum, you do all these various activities. And I was thinking about how these activities are like together, these shirts was this part, this identity, this part of a thing that you create. And so I created a portrait of that using those materials. And when I showed it to this professor, he said, but you didn't do anything around the figure. There's no background. What else is there to say? You challenged me to use something else, whether another, again, I couldn't use paint. So whether another medium, another intervention in addition to fabric. And at that time, I was taking the printmaking classes, and I said, well, I guess I'm going to have to use this. And that's also when I was fiddling around with the Dinkra symbols and reading about those. And I saw where it could be used to, like, there's always, I have a hard time telling stories linearly because I feel like there's just so much needed to create context.
I know, right?
And so I'm saying a ton in my work at the same time, and I'm using material and all these symbols to say everything without saying everything. Because there's a point where the work has too much, right? So I have all these various strategies to communicate all these things and meet people at various levels, thinking about accessibility, because I want the people that I make work about that are still caregivers, care workers, to see themselves in the work and would want to live with the work. I want them to see they understand the work, because so many times so much time art is feels like this other world for people like from working class families. And so I want them to feel it's accessible and have these access points where they are seeing themselves in the work and can feel relative to the work. And so both these material choices are very immediate. Like printmaking is like, I'm duplicating because I think I need to make this. So it's kind of gestural in a way, as painting can be, but can also be very precise. So I have moments in my printmaking where it's very loose, and then it gets very tight. And so, yeah, I've started to use those materials based on these classes, but then it morphed into this ability to see how they can be strategic processes for what I want to say, when I want to say it.
And I have another question. I really related to what you were talking about, the stories of Caribbean people telling, like only them knowing and their families knowing about what happened in Panama, because my great grandfather was also Jamaican, and that's like the same thing that happened with me. Like my grandfather, he was the only one telling us like, no, his name was Charles King and this and that. And basically it almost became like the story of someone I love but I've never met, right? And at least with the work, another person that I love that also relates to this is Jana Dier, that her work is also very much related to that. And I know you had like a lot of like conversations with her. How was her perspective also like meaningful to you, knowing that you two are both like Caribbean women, and like the stories of like things that were told in the household?
Yeah, I love that question, because I think this is the first time I've come to a place where I feel so at home with the artists, because I mean, no shade on the US, but everyone is on. But
All shade,
everyone is
all
trying to be
shade.
somebody, right? Everybody's trying to be somebody. And when you go to like various art events and you're around other artists, everyone's trying to flex. They're trying to be like, this is my chip on my shoulder. And I've always had a hard time doing that. I just literally want to be friends.
I hear you.
And it's like, you want to be friends? But let's just see visit. Yeah, and so I have that vibe, and I see that so many of the artists I've met here have that same interest. Like, we are not competition. We are building culture together. And
Absolutely.
all of her perspectives creates this reality that is our world. So we're imagining and building a world all at the same time. And so I think that value I have and they've had here, and it has been such a wonderful experience speaking to Gianna because I learned about her family, how her family came here, was able to tell her the little I know of my family, and even learning how the story opens up and people start remembering more, and just that bit of these conversations, all these conversations I've had with various people being here, it has infused in the work in so many unique ways that you can't create in a vacuum, isolated in the studio with the doors closed and the windows tight. You can't, you need these interactions to mold and build the work and create. We always chasing for authenticity. Yes. You can't synthesize authenticity. It comes by having real conversations with real people that are real, you know? And so it was lovely speaking to Gianna, and she even donated fabric to my project.
I love that.
So we have this relationship in even our process because she's fueled me and I fueled her in stories. So it's like a give and take. So thank you for that question. No, thank you.
And I love that. And I would want to add that collaboration and that ecosystem that I love that you feel so welcome in here in Panama is something that we're trying to create interinstitutionally as well. You guys are a nonprofit institution. We're a nonprofit institution. We struggle for resources, and I love the fact that we can all be, and I'm grateful for all of you here because you coming to these talks and listening to us and how we can work together to make this happen, and this unity and collaboration is what will create a more solid cultural sector in our country and explore funding resources for more institutions, for more artists, for more professionals in the sector. Just building up on what you said, we need to, and what you said, we need to continue working together and support each other. That's the only way forward.
I also want to say that we are so grateful to the MAC because they have this big machine, the
What's it called?
press, a big press that has like that.
Let me
Krystle
tell you
has been
something.
working on, and she loves it, and it's great that we have access to that magical.
I'm pretty
Press.
sure you'd take it if you could.
Suitcase, careful. To be surprised, I don't even have a press that large at my institution in the US. It's the
Whoa.
biggest press I've ever worked on. I don't have to configure my work to fit underneath the bed. I mean, you have a tool here that I hope I have inspired people to use even more than they're currently using because it's really exceptional. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's part of working interinstitutionally and
Absolutely.
building something together. So I'm very happy that your experience during the residency has included more institutions, more people like Greta and artists that have come by. And so that is what we're looking for, for everything to come together.
Any other question? Oh, no.
Hello, Krystle. Could you tell us how do you start your work through your unique system of kind of painting by color with the numbers and everything, like very organized? Or is that a strict secret?
Not a secret. I am a crowdsourced studio. Okay. Let's go one more. Is that picture in there? Oh, I can tell you as it's trying to get the image. So as I mentioned before, when I get a wealth of material that I'm going to use for a body of work, I have to know, no, I think it's the next one. No. Is there one with my sketchbook? I'm not sure. So I have a sketchbook. I know some people use their sketchbook for various things. So when I get a body of like a bunch of fabrics, I'm constantly trying to understand what I have. Yeah, you can leave it at that. I figure out what I have by snipping a little piece of all the fabrics and I glue them down into my sketchbook and I literally I have every piece of fabric that I have in my studio in the sketchbook. I then assign each of those fabrics a number. So brown, I may have like 4 browns, B1, B2, B3, B4. I have I have blue, I then put BL, BL1, BL2,
You color code your material.
yeah, I color code it. So I create this sketchbook catalog and then I label what body of work it's for because I don't want to confuse them. I want to know what I use for what. And so each body of work has its palette and sometimes you'll see some fabrics reoccur. Like you'll see some of my florals that I use for greenery occur in this body of work because I still had some, but then I use it differently against another fabric to create a different look, a different mood. Because in looking at what I also did, because all the images in the archives are black and white, I had to create a whole palette on my own. I had to imagine it all. And so, which I actually have not done before. I usually have some color reference to guide the work. And so what
It's like colorizing.
yeah, I had to like literally Kodachrome my work.
Yeah, I imagine that can be difficult.
It
'cause
it was different. It was a fun challenge though.
because we have postcards in color, but those were even
Painted like
they were
watercolors.
they were painted in Europe where they were made. So people that painted them
It
did not know.
to the area. So what I did, I went online and I looked at images of Panama, like what people that came here and took pictures. I wanted to see what the color of the light looks like. I started. I learned this specifically when I was in grad school in Florida, not by the teachers, but by seeing the space. That the light is different. Like the light is transcribed different in various spaces. Florida has a very specific light. I'm now keen to notice the differences in light and how it hits everything in different spaces. And so I have been using that in mind to start thinking, okay, what materials do I have that can create that same mood based on the light that I see in some of these images that describe foliage, describes land. Like this mix here has been a reoccurring mix of like what I called excavated land. Like what does excavated land look like? Usually like land that is like milled and pushed around and no longer has its roots that are holding it together looks really barren. It looks really it may be moist, but it's just been invaded. It doesn't have its body that it had with the plants that holds it together. And so that's a palette that I've been using for that. And then sky, my little cousin in the US, so my second cousin, I got some of her baby clothes. And so those are in this work. So I've been using her onesies and her PJs, and that's often been working for sky. And so if you go back to the first slide. Uh-huh. Almost. Here. Okay. So here, this piece here, that's a onesie. And then Gretel gave me a donation too. And so these are Gretel's shirts. And then another baby clothes again. And so together they start to create a space that's built on gives the mood and feeling that I'd like to say in some ways get the essence of, not to necessarily duplicate.
Any more questions? Comment? I want to know how long it takes you to do one of those.
I've been here 6 weeks. I've almost done 7 of them, but I have never worked this fast in my life. I've never done it. But I see that I have the skill for so much more. Anybody that came to my studio saw that I have this note in there in my sketchbook that says I didn't know I had that much in me. Literally, I didn't know. Gretel has been helping me cut fabric like Monday in the studio, putting it all together. And but generally it takes me about a month to do, from cutting fabric to printing to sewing it all together. About a month for like a piece of about, sorry, I'm not in centimeters or meters, so like 3 feet by 4 feet, something like that. Because I usually take my time and like making these choices in time with gaps to allow for me to be very intentional. But I started to do a lot of the work before I came, so that's how I've been able to fast pace the production here.
I wanted to ask, do you usually work on more? I mean, I've seen you are working on a bunch of things at the same time. Is that your usual process, or is that?
Yeah. If I have too little of items going, if I just have one piece working on, then you don't find that a series has the unity. Because I look at, like, say when right now I'm in the train of thought of Panama Canal and workers, laborers in that space. I want to make sure that it's like an essay where like I carry out a bit of every of that thought to the end of wherever the end will be. I don't know. And so I want to have like at least 4 or 5 pieces in progress, and I'm treating each area, like the land, the foliage, the individuals, with the same feelings that my hands transcribe.
I have another question.
Um, I couldn't believe that you have only been here for 6 weeks. And my question is a bit silly because you already have such a huge collection to deal with and such a huge part of history. But I was just wondering if you have been able also to look into other textile work from other Panamanian heritages, such as the Kuna, who work with reverse applique, similar to what you're wearing. Yes. And indigenous sewing and work and textiles, and also fibers from vegetable fibers and whatnot.
So although it hasn't made it into my work, I've learned from others and seen where I have these similarities in some ways of how I am working, as they are stitching these small pieces together. And it's in some ways illustrative, but distilled imagery, and very gestural. So I see where I have these this relationship, and so that's why I felt, in addition to the lotto, I felt it made so much sense to bring in this other thing that tied the whole compositions together. And I have this week, when I get everything done, put all the bows on the pieces, I can go to the Mola Museum. That's on my list. And also I'm going to Cologne, because so much of this has been through conversations with people to get the work started and to fast pace getting everything done. And then also the archives and some resources online. But I have not yet had the time to go to that place, but now I need to be in those places, and that will be the last bit of what will get there. Thank you for that.
Bueno, si no hay más preguntas, muchísimas gracias por venir.
Thank you.
El sábado de 4 a 7 los esperamos en Casa Santana. Thank you so much, Krystle and Anna, always.
Thank you. It's your house, both of you. Anytime. Yeah, I know you are. we've got pending coffees. Thank you, everybody. Gracias.